Hello, I'm Ania Zalewska, Professor of Finance, Research Chair and Director of a Center for Finance Governance and Sustainable Growth at the University of Leicester School of Business. And I'm also the lead of the Green Finance Thematical Advisory Group at the Land Use for Net Zero Nurture and People Hub, an innovative research initiative that aims to help drive the transformation of UK land use needed to achieve net zero by 2050. The Lands Hub is co-funded by UKRI, the Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs on behalf of England and Wales, the Department for Energy and Net Zero, the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs of Northern Ireland, and the Scottish Government. And I'm today with Matthew Orman. Matthew, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Matthew Orman. I am from the Sustainable Soils Alliance and also the communications lead for the Lands Hub.
And today we are joined by Sam Bauer, the Head of Sustainability Natural Environment at Balfour Beatty PLC. Sam has been working in nature conservation for over 20 years. He is a chartered environmentalist, a member of the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management, and professional member of Arboricultural Association. At Balfour Beatty, Sam leads initiatives in natural environment, asset creation, biodiversity net gain, and ecological mitigation for major infrastructure projects. And exactly his experience with Biodiversity Net Gain program, to which we'll be referring as BNG, is exactly what we'd like to talk to him today. England's BNG program is an ambitious attempt to create a regulated market for nature, linking development directly to measurable biodiversity improvements. Understanding how this policy works in practice is crucial, particularly from the perspective of practitioners who navigate its requirements on the ground. The insight help reveal whether BNG is not only creating biodiversity assets, but also delivering a functioning and investable market. Now, on the second anniversary of its creation, it's really a good time to reflect on the past 2 years and think about how to improve things in the future. And given that Balfour Beatty positioned itself as a major UK infrastructure contractor, actively embedding nature positive and nature-based approaches into work, question is, how do you assess BNG from the perspective of your involvement with it? Come over to you.
So, in some ways, obviously there's so many different ways to answer that question, but in a central way, it is just another contract requirement. So we have any project has a specification and a brief, and the infrastructure, be it traditional grey infrastructure or green infrastructure, BNG or otherwise, is a contract requirement which has got to fit specific targets, specifications, and meet specific requirements. So in a very real way, it is just one of the many things that any project has to deliver. Obviously, it gets more complicated, but that is when you sort of get into the challenges and nuances around things like habitat creation, which is sort of the technical discipline, as opposed to the technical discipline of building a structure or building drainage features, whatever. So there's technical considerations which we can get into as much as you like, but in broad terms, it's just one of the contract requirements that will be associated with project delivery for any particular scheme.
But the perspective of Balfour Beatty, does it make it better in your mission to create nature positive impact? Is it really playing the role you hoped it would? Has it changed anything in your practice?
Yes. Okay. So I'd like to unpack that in a few different ways. Firstly, we don't treat the delivery of biodiversity net gain as in and of itself nature positive. For us, our nature positive commitment is around additionality. So it's around going beyond contract requirements. It's going beyond just what we have to do. If it's a requirement of the scheme to create X amount of hectares of woodland or whatever it might be, and we deliver that, then that in and of itself, from a business point of view, isn't nature positive. Obviously, you could take it from a different perspective, an environmental point of view, and you could say that is nature positive, and our client might, especially if they've gone beyond their 10% requirement, for example, they may have it as a nature positive achievement. But for us, if we're doing what we've been paid to do, then we are just delivering on our contract requirements. It's when we go above and beyond in whatever way that might be. So it might be an additional habitat creation, or it might be in being able to protect more habitat, remove less during construction, and therefore having a larger net improvement than the specifics of the contract requirements. So that's a bit of a fine point, but it is important for how we conceptualize and actually express nature positive as an action for us. So that's one component. In terms of, I think biodiversity net gain has the potential to be a real game changer for broad environmental benefit on large scale infrastructure projects. Key reason for that is because it's a step beyond the traditional protected species per habitat, protected habitats mindset. Treating habitats as a whole is a revolutionary approach in terms of project delivery, because it's meaning we're going from just a strict sort of legislative compliance attached to or great crested newts or dormice or whatever it might be, to actually thinking much more ambitiously and broader about the habitats as a whole, which as an ecologist is absolutely brilliant. I think it's a really important step forward. And in terms of project delivery, it means that the component parts, there's two aspects to it. One is the technical considerations. So, as Matthew will say, soil handling becomes so much more of a priority, so much more of a consideration, because it is the foundational building block of terrestrial habitat. And so making sure that the soils are being looked after in this most beneficial way to maintain their health value, their ecosystem value, so that they can support whatever habitat needs to be created. Because this is now a legal and contractual requirement to deliver whatever the habitat specifications they are, it means that all the aspects that go into that habitat creation become more, it's not that they become more important so much as they get more focused attention, and it's easier to have non-specialists recognize why it matters. So you can get buy-in, you can have those conversations where the urgency and the need to maybe do things differently from how they may have been done historically, or even possibly in a slower or more careful way, which might have cost implications, but there are value benefits that come from that to the project, and therefore for us being able to complete successfully. I think added to that is the duration, is the fact that it's not just, you finish and you walk away, but the fact that you've got to have habitats that will endure for a long time, a minimum of 30 years. That means that you have to get it right, or at least you have to be doing everything in your power to get it right when you start, because it's going to be subject to long-term ongoing monitoring, which was the case already on a number of projects, but wasn't a uniform approach. And the fact that you have that consistency is really, really important. And it now is a key determiner of project success or failure, which is, ultimately the test of whether we've successfully delivered a scheme or not. So this is really, really important from a variety of different angles.
You don't have to raise your hand. You are just talking like me in the same speed.
I,
So
I
just just
wanted
chip in.
wanted to make sure. I mean, I was sort of two-part question, really. I was wondering, in terms of the scope of your projects, how many of your BNG are on site and how many are off site? And going back to what you were saying about making sure that those projects are well designed,
Yeah.
etc. To what extent do you have ongoing engagement with the off-site projects that you've funded?
So Balfour Beatty, by and large, this is not always the case, but by and large, is working as a principal contractor. So what that means is the client, whoever they may be, some statutory body or an offshoot of a statutory body, or a local authority or whoever it might be, it's their scheme. They are the originator. They are the funder of the project, and they will have had a design input, and whether they maintain that designer throughout and we just come as the contractor and build it, or whether that designer then works for us, or the designer changes and we're in it. So there's the contractual nuances that determine which organizations are involved, but you have the client, the designer, and you have the contractor, in very simple terms. Because we are the contractor by and large, we don't tend to be responsible for the off-site situation. That tends to be, and there are obviously exceptions, but speaking in generalities, it tends to be client advised by their designer or independently has created the offset opportunity with whoever it might be, local wildlife trust or whoever it might be, the environment bank. And so we often will not be involved in that relationship. What our responsibility is around what happens on site. And that'll be making sure that we're not over clearing habitats, making sure that we are protecting habitats, and making sure that we are creating habitats that hit the target specifications on site. There will be exceptions to that, and there are even exceptions when we are the client. But by and large, especially in the realm of the business that I operate mostly in, we are working as to be the builder. We are constructing it, and so our focus is what's happening inside that red line boundary rather than what's happening externally to that. I think I might have forgotten your second question, but that's only answer to the first one.
No, you did, because I was interested in what your relationship was with the offset land, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, we will be involved in the conversation potentially, and there are other schemes where we have had more of an active role in as a kind of advisory, consulting, supporting role in it, but we're not usually the key determiner, because ultimately there will be exceptions to this rule, but I can't think of any that come to mind. We're ultimately not the ones who are legally responsible for what's happening on off-site. We're not signing the checks. We aren't doing the specifying the details in the development consent order or whatever it might be. So usually that's a separate conversation to the one that we're primarily focused on.
But you will be the one who decide which units you buy if you go off-site, right?
Well, no, because I mean, we might be influencing it and we might be providing guidance, but because we're not the landowner, so we don't own, if we're employed by a road, national highways, for example, to build a road, our job is to occupy that site for the duration of the construction period, to deliver whatever is in the design for that apron of works, to look after it for the duration that's required in the aftercare package, and then we walk away. So we won't be purchasing units because it's not our asset.
Right, it's not your job.
Yeah. So that's and we do advise, and there are exceptions to that. We do thing. We have a business that is an investments business. We have a business that builds homes, for example. But my area of the business I work in is more around this nationally significant infrastructure projects, and those we're working on behalf of our clients rather than owning that particular, that nuclear power station or whatever it might be.
But when you sorry, go on, Matthew.
Well, no, I was going to ask. I mean, this is, it's BNG is about improving and also offsetting any environmental biodiversity impact you're having in the first place.
Yeah.
Do you feel like there is a strong enough regulatory baseline in the first place to limit the amount of impact you can and should be having, i.e., by BNG trying to do too much, more than it should?
From my experience of it, I don't think it's trying to do too much. I think we're still finding the way, and at this moment in time, I haven't seen the full details of what it's going to look like for NSIPs, for nationally significant infrastructure projects. I think really that we'll be able to answer that question much better in the years to come, because that's when we can see the quality, particularly for my concern, of the habitats that we are creating on site. Are they of a sufficient quality to reflect what the metric is trying to calculate? When you factor in all the extraneous considerations which could impact on habitat success, climate change, anthropogenic factors like vandalism, for example, increased pest and pathogen, flooding events, all these sorts of things. Are we hitting the targets which are set for us? And really, the test will come through the quality, of the monitoring, and then the consequences for when it isn't successful. And really, so it's that monitoring and the authority that monitoring creates, that, if you will, the policing of it. It has the potential to be excellent, has the potential to become a box ticking exercise. And I think really it's the future which will be able to answer that question rather than the setup of it at this time, I would say. I'm sure
You've said potential a few times, so I'm going to bring you back to that. But Annie, you had a question.
Well, probably similar. Okay, so we are talking about now the importance of monitoring. I mean, there are two issues really. First, it's currently assessing whether what you're doing satisfies the units or more, right? So measurement of what has been done. How does it work? What is the potential bottleneck? What could be improved to make it work better? Not only easier for constructors, but to make it better from their mental perspective. And second, going back to what you just said about the potential of monitoring in the future, how it will work. What should we pay attention to make sure that it works? Where do you think, the problems could be, and how could they be solved, or at least addressed, that potential negative impact is minimized?
So I think there's a danger. Sorry, someone's doing some drilling or something nearby, so I don't know if you can hear that background noise. So apologies if you can. I think there is a risk whenever, and this is not specific to BNG, I think this is just a frailty of the human mind, but whenever you create some sort of artificial construct, you start to focus on the way that is completed rather than what it's trying to achieve. So, there's the old, it's like the finger pointing at the moon, and you focus on the finger rather than actually looking at the moon. And I think there's a risk of that with this, in that it becomes all about the metric rather than about creating rich, ecologically beneficial habitats. So on the flip of that is, of course, you do need to have a metric. You do need to have something to test it against. You do need to have something to show accountability, to measure success and failure against. So it's a difficult challenge, and I'm not saying it's an easy one to resolve, but really, in a way, you need to kind of inform big picture thinking. So I've been creating habitats in this doing this sort of work for nearly 3 decades now. I've been doing this, and you have to sort of respond to nature. You can't you can have all sorts of great ideas, but ultimately the best ideas are the ones that are adaptive, that work with changing environments, because the one constant is change. So the nature is always adapting, and we do have a very changing environment now, given climatic conditions and so forth. So adaptability is essential for long-term value, I think. And a good habitat design, a good habitat creation, good habitat management over the long term is one that's going to adapt to changing circumstances, including accident and unintended good positive consequences. So how can you have a rigorous monitoring system where you've got real accountability and you've got real challenge that these big projects that cost a lot of money get spent on them. There's a lot of work that goes into the design, and then obviously monitoring isn't going to be cheap, and reporting over the long term. How can you have a system that everyone can have confidence in, is authoritative, is verifiable, but that allows for adaptive management, allows for change? And I think there's attempts have been made with the habitat management and monitoring plans to allow for that flexibility, but again, it's going to come back to that testing over time to see how well that turns out. And I think really one of the challenges we have in the industry is having the expertise, is to have the knowledge and that level of understanding, so that the people who are assessing these habitats and the people who are designing these habitats have got that level of competence, of subject matter excellence and expertise, to be able to have that slightly more adaptive and flexible understanding, so that the habitat is the goal and the metric is a reflection of that, rather than it being about the metric and just focusing on that. So, and I know there are nuances within it that means you don't have to be a slave to the metric, but having that kind of confidence to know when there is something better that could be done, which doesn't fit so neatly into the numbering system. That requires a lot of knowledge, but also a lot of courage to be prepared to put yourself out there like that. And that can be difficult, particularly when you've got very big, very complicated, very expensive projects, where you do have to have a very, very high level of accountability, not least because a lot of the time this is public money that's being spent. So, there is a need to ensure compliance. So it's kind of like there's slightly contradictory things at work, which can be navigated, but it's allowing for that flexibility and maybe even trust in the process to enable that to happen.
And we see this a lot with soil, actually, and a lot of the way that soils are starting to be built into these increasingly global frameworks on sustainability reporting, and the fact that many of them have tried to learn from the experience of carbon and climate, but where a ton of carbon is a universally understood concept, we don't have the same thing for nature, which is why I can understand your point about the sort of the straitjacket that measurement can be, in the way that can actually get in the way of much broader understanding of what's going on. One thing I'd like to ask about is, we talk about nature, we talk about biodiversity. Is resilience in there? Because this is the term that we're using more and more to define what we want most of all from our landscapes.
I think that resilience is the word of the year, to be honest with you. I think it's all that anyone talks about. It's absolutely and it's for a very good reason. I didn't mean that in a critical sense. It is absolutely fundamental. I think that is the difference between greenwashing and meaningful nature benefit. Call it nature positive, call it what you will, and it is that resilience. And so um, it's having that long-term perspective. And I think this is one of the many interesting ways that habitat creation differs from landscaping. For example, they're very similar disciplines. You're going to be looking after soil, you're going to be seeding some salt or another, or at least preparing soil so that it can for natural colonization. You're probably going to do some sort of planting. So from a sort of operational point of view, they're very similar activities, but conceptually they're really, really different in lots of different ways. But one of the ways they're different is the perspective. So you think about particularly sort of ornamental planting. Where you're creating something that's going to be very beautiful. And a lot of landscape architects, with good reason, will want that. They want it. They don't want to wait. They want it to be instantly looking brilliant. From the moment that you walk off site, it looks phenomenal. Whereas when you're creating habitats, I mean, I spent the first 10, 15 years of my career working mostly in woodland management and that sort of area. And you're thinking, on average, at least 150 years in the future with the actions that you're taking. Sometimes you'll come back. Sometimes you might just be thinking about 20 or 30 years in the future, but you're certainly not thinking about today. You're always thinking about years, decades, maybe even centuries in advance, because you're thinking about what you're doing now and how this is going to change in an evolving landscape to work effectively. And I think that's true. I mean, obviously, with habitats, you want to have as rapid a benefit as you possibly can, but you have to have that very long-term perspective as well. Otherwise, it's not resilient. And to come back to the point that I've already made about the challenges that we face because of climate and because of the uncertainty, it's not like we know in 20 years we're going to have a Mediterranean climate. We have no idea. It could well be that, if the AMOC shuts down, we could have like a northern Scandinavian climate. So there's so much uncertainty. How effectively biodiversity design can cater for that uncertainty so you do have resilient landscapes. And I think that's when you deal with uncertainty, that's where adaptability is so fundamental. And I think that's how you achieve resilience is by having an adaptive mindset, which is a very easy thing to say, but obviously a much more difficult thing to do in practical terms, especially when a project, in order to satisfy the terms of its consent, requires X hectarage of X, Y habitat, to reach this stage by year 15 and this stage by year 20. It is making it difficult because you've kind of got science, accountancy, and I don't know, artistry that you're trying to swoosh together into something that kind of works harmoniously, and it's not a necessarily comfortable fit sometimes.
Yes, I think what you just mentioned is that this adaptability of environment, it's one thing. Adaptability of regulation, it's another thing.
Yeah.
And it's really very hard to manage it. And it's not only in the context of adaptability of nature regulation, but any regulation. Regulation is stiff by nature, right? Whether it's an energy regulation, water regulation, any utilities or of any kind, typically regulators react to something what already happened. They seem to be people who have a very narrow vision when it comes to the future, because it's exactly this unpredictability that you can't create physically regulation that definitely will fit potential scenarios when you don't know what scenarios will be. However, when it comes to the nature, this is something that it's not only hard to define as such, but it has very long-term consequences. If you plant, if I understand correctly, sorry, I'm not environmentalist by education, so I can only see trees growing in my back garden or in a park. But if you start planting one particular type of trees, and there is, dramatic change in environmental conditions for whatever reasons, those trees cannot be just replanted, right? You can't turn them 30, degrees south to give them better lighting, right? They
Yeah,
are
yeah.
there. So how does it really work in practice, with all those metrics that are in place? Do these metrics somehow help because they put at least some kind of target in front of you, and you need
Yeah.
only flexibility of mind of people who implement those targets later on in the future? Or whether from the beginning having metrics restricts somehow that assuming that people have open mind right now, would be better that it didn't have to comply. How to bring these two together? Because of course we know that people, I mean, especially in finance, they are extremely myopic. They will pick up solutions that are good for now and bring returns immediately, rather than in 30 years when they're already not in a job, right? They don't want the fund to perform. I mean, they don't mind if a farm, sorry, if a fund performs well in 50 years, but it won't be their success. I don't know what.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. And I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head there, which is that it's quite easy to find fault in things and to point out where things don't work or where there's gaps or where, it doesn't quite sit as ideally as one would like. And that's fair and it's true, and there is value to that. But also, I think, and this sort of goes back to my first point of this conversation, which is biodiversity net gain means that we are doing something. We are looking at the problem and we are attempting to solve it. It's not perfect. There probably isn't a perfect system, certainly not that we've managed to come up with just yet. I think there are better designs which attempt to be more reflective of changing circumstances, or even just more reflective of the actual circumstances. Things like quality of the soils analysis, for example, to make sure that they really are the best. Your habitat specification really is absolutely best suited to the particular soils that you have on site, for example. Said that, give it 20 years, plants that are meant to be there will be the ones that have flourished, and the ones that won't, it'll nature sorts itself out to a very large extent. I think it's too easy to find fault, and we are too prone to it. And I think actually it's important to recognize that biodiversity net gain is a phenomenal attempt to think beyond just designated protected this and protected that, or the alternative, which is just ignore it and crack on and maybe put in some amenity grassland and one species of, ornamental tree which will not be looked after and drop down dead in 15 years because it wasn't right for the growing conditions or whatever, what have you. It's a massive step forward in the right direction. And as we continue to work with it, I provided it is assessed, provided performance is reviewed, provided there is accountability when people don't do what it is that they've committed to, and there isn't legitimate ecological sound reasons for that, that there is consequences to that. Provided that happens, I think there will be an evolution of understanding and adaptation as there is in every specialism as we go forward. And I think it's to be applauded, and I'm immensely, I guess, proud and grateful that the UK, Britain, England has introduced this legislation, is trying to push it forward and to make it work. And it there will be mistakes because that's life.
But to that, is it designed in a way that can absorb and adapt to and flex to what it learns along the way?
I think to a certain extent it is, because it does allow for, I think there's two components, or possibly three, that does give it that flex. And they're very important. One is the fact that you can override the metric. You don't have to just adhere to it. As long as you can justify the the reasoning behind it. So I think that gives flex at one angle. But equally, I think the fact that we do have irreplaceable habitats as well is vitally important. So you've kind of got two guardrails. That maybe guardrails is the wrong metaphor here, but you've got two parameters which do allow for exploration in one direction, justified, evidence-led, scientifically valid, but also a very hard red line of this is irreplaceable habitat. And I think those two allow for a lot of movement between it or within that area for, the things that work well to be found and the things that don't work so well to be identified as well. So um, I'm not. It's not perfect. I don't think anyone who's involved in BNG would say it's perfect. And it doesn't include a whole load of things which habitat does. We're talking about, plant communities being used as a proxy for a habitat. We're not including a whole range of other things. I expect in time other things will start to be included more in it, particularly with remote sensing technologies and various low economic input monitoring abilities, eDNA, acoustic monitoring, and that sort of thing. It will probably open up for an expansion in how we calibrate and calculate the value of habitats. I'm speculating, but I think that's a reasonable guess. So I think it's going to change and develop over time. I think the fact that we do have those sort of that hard line about irreplaceable habitats and the openness of to stray from the metric when suitable, I think that creates a good working environment to really try and make this thing work as well as we can.
And I've got one last question. I don't know about you.
Yeah, carry on.
Well, I suppose the Lunds is UK wide, BNG is England. I don't know if you've had any experience of other nations looking to develop their own or duplicate. If there's one thing that you would like the other three nations to know or consider when developing a BNG equivalent, what would it be?
I mean, they are. We do a lot of work in Scotland. I know they are developing their own different but similar system. And we've used actually the DEFRA metric for at clients' wishes for some schemes north of the border, because it's a standardized approach which gives authority and confidence in what's been found. We've also used other metrics which have been created by clients or whatever. I mean, I don't know if I really feel in a position to make recommendations, but I think beyond what I've just said, I think identifying those things which are most precious and which we cannot afford to lose is essential. Again, allowing for flexibility where the site conditions and the expert knowledge is such that a BNG or BNG-like metric actually isn't the most appropriate way to measure something, or it needs to be done in tandem with other considerations, I think is wholly appropriate and to be recommended where possible, or when applicable, rather. I had a third point, but it's just skipped out of my brain. But
It's Friday afternoon.
it is Friday afternoon. Yes, it is. But I think,
Take your time.
yeah, it's probably not going to come back. And sometimes a thought and it's disappeared down a hole. It's not going to come back out again.
Great that it doesn't happen to me. It cheers me up.
It'll come back at 3 o'clock in the morning. Okay, that's what I meant to say.
Well, feel free to.
I'll message you quickly at that point. So we've got. I mean, the thing that it's part of the picture. It's really useful, and this isn't the thought I had, but it's a different one, which it might be still useful, it's worth mentioning, is looking at it in the round. So we talk about nature, we talk about biodiversity, and sometimes these two phrases are used as if they're the same thing, and obviously they're not. Nature is a much bigger picture than just biodiversity. I mean, you know, been working in ecology and biodiversity for a number of years, so that is my focus. But actually, it's more, and we need to factor in air, we need to factor in water, we need to factor in soil, but we also need to factor in human use. We need to think about amenity value. We need to think about the cultural resonance of landscapes. And ideas like natural capital and ecosystem services and all these other ways that we can look at the natural world and determine value. I think those allowing those to, and also resource value and things like productivity of, be it farming or forestry or what have you, it's the more rounded perspective we have on nature beyond just biodiversity, the more beneficial our interaction with the natural world can be for it, but for us as well, for now and for future generations. So I think BNG is brilliant, but let's go bigger, let's go broader, let's include ideas around natural capital into design. And wouldn't that be great if that was part of the regulatory framework as well? You know, if if compensation for the loss of, I don't know, it could be water quality or air quality or whatever, because these things have so many functional purposes and values. The more we can appreciate them, the better place we are to, and you know, regard them with the importance that they have.
Brilliant, thank you.
So to take you up on that, would it help the nature and businesses if the nations, at least on the island where England, Scotland, and Wales are, had sort of unified system? Or doesn't really matter, because environment in Scotland may require different metrics, may require different approaches. So it doesn't matter that it will be slightly different from England. Same with Wales. So to recognize, diversity of environment at the same time and potentially different approaches, either underlying philosophy behind it remains the same. Or should we really push for unification? Maybe not for environmental reasons, but even for business reasons and productivity.
So we deliver large scale projects, and it's not uncommon for those to straddle boundary lines between Scotland and England, for example, or England and Wales. It's immensely helpful if you have one consistent approach, if you have one legal regulatory approach, which means that you can actually compare and have joined up unified practices and processes and rules and understanding. I think that there is no reason why the system that works for Cornwall and areas outside of Newcastle, if it can cover that sort of geographic or the woodland in Kent and the Lake District, if you can cover that much ecological habitat difference, there's no reason why you can't have it also cover the Highlands of Scotland and the mountains of Wales and valleys and so forth. So actually, I think I don't think it's unreasonable to suggest that a BNG system would be sophisticated enough to allow for the divergence of habitat types. I don't think that's a problem, and I think it would actually, so long as it is subtle enough and sensitive enough to allow for what can be immense differences between different landscapes. I mean, if you think about, I'm in Kent, and if you go to the Lake District from here, it could be 10,000 miles away. It's a very, very different habitat altogether. So it doesn't seem at all unreasonable that you can have one system that works for them all, and it would definitely make things like project delivery and just the cost, the consenting mechanisms and the compliance mechanisms and reporting systems, it would make life a lot easier and it would provide that consistency. So it seems like a fairly easy win, although I'm sure there are numerous political reasons why that isn't as attractive a proposition. But yeah, that's not my view.
Thank you very much. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think I've covered everything. The point that I have made, but I would like to make again is just because something isn't perfect doesn't mean it's not a massive improvement. And,
yes, absolutely.
And I think we should embrace the opportunity it provides and try to get the absolute best out of it. And if it is failing in any places, let's change it to make it work better.
And if you could write a letter to Santa and ask for a particular improvement, what would it be?
In all honesty, because it's Santa and he does big wishes, I'd go all out and I'd say, let's not just have it be about biodiversity. Let's have a fully rounded nature net gain system, which is inclusive of all of those things which I listed earlier on, or as close to it as we can do. So.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you for being our host and our conversation. It was such a pleasure to have Sam with us and listen to his views and opinions, how things work, and that we should be positive about it. That we should embrace what we have done rather than complain. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Anything from you, Matt?
No, that's great. Thanks a lot, Sam.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.